Hello everyone, I'm Taylor and it's time for my very first book review. Today I'd like to talk to you about Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy by Cassandra Clare, Sarah Rees Brennan, Robin Wasserman, and Maureen Johnson. This review is going to be non-spoilery for Tales of the Shadowhunter Academy, but if you haven't read The Mortal Instruments or The Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare, I really recommend that you read those before watching this review or reading this book. This book is about Simon Lewis, who's a character that we're first introduced to in the Mortal Instruments series, and he is part of the main group of kids in that book. He is the best friend of the main character, Clare Frey. Simon starts off the Mortal Instruments series as a human, and throughout that series becomes a vampire. For most of the series, he is a vampire, and then in City of Heavenly Fire, he is turned back into a mortal and stripped of his memories. By doing this, he essentially saves the whole Shadowhunter world and frees our protagonists from this demon dimension they're trapped in. At the very end of City of Heavenly Fire, Simon is reintroduced to all of his best friends and given the tiniest amounts of his memories back. At the end of that story, he recognizes that he knew all of these people, but unfortunately he can't remember any of his memories or adventures that took place with them. Now we've gotten right up to the start of Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy, where Simon is human again, he doesn't have his memories, but he is trying to figure out and find a balance between who he is now and who everybody else in his life knew him to be previously. I really enjoyed Simon as the protagonist of this book. I felt like in the Mortal Instruments series, a lot of the times he was just the best friend character and he was kind of the token, dopey, nerdy guy. But in this book, he's really developed a lot more than that, and we get to know him more personally, which I really liked. Very early on in this story, we are introduced to the fact that Simon is really struggling with his identity. He knows that he should love all of these friends he had before, but at the same time, he feels a little bit of this resentment and frustration that he can't be who they need him to be. Picking up at the beginning of this story, we've got Simon and he's really struggling. You see this early on that he feels like he should be able to access this old Simon and these memories he used to have for the sake of the people in his life that he knows he should love. Those people being Clare and Isabel, the characters from the Mortal Instruments series. Through Simon's thoughts, we're able to see that he wants to attend the newly reopened Shadowhunter Academy so that he can find his place amongst all of his friends again and potentially even get his memories back once he goes through the process to become a Shadowhunter. This story follows Simon's journey as he goes through the Shadowhunter Academy, does all of his training, and learns exactly what it's going to take to become a Shadowhunter. On the flip side of that, we also get to take this emotional journey with Simon as he reconnects with his best friend Clare and his one-time sort of maybe might still be his girlfriend Isabel, who he's trying to remember and trying to become the Simon that this woman first fell in love with. The really interesting thing about this book, something that I very much enjoyed, is that it's not just following Simon, but as he goes through the Shadowhunter Academy, all of these various guest lecturers are coming and telling stories to the students there who are also training to become Shadowhunters. We have some of our old favorite characters from the Mortal Instruments and the Infernal Devices that come and tell the students more stories about Shadowhunter life. Some of my absolute favorite guest lecturers who visited the Academy were Tessa from the Infernal Devices series, and actually, maybe a little surprisingly, Robert Lightwood from the Mortal Instruments series. While Tessa's there, she tells a story that expands upon her life with Will at the Institute of London and various things that they encountered in their time there. Then we also have Robert Lightwood, who has come to tell a story of warning to the children at the Academy. This warning includes never before seen info about the radical group The Circle and their leader Valentine, who is the main villain in the first 3 Mortal Instruments books. I really enjoyed this story about the young Circle members and Valentine. To me, it kind of felt a little bit like a prequel to the Mortal Instruments series, and obviously the Infernal Devices are a prequel series, sort of, but much, much earlier in time. It was interesting to see the early days of the Circle and basically these characters who are the parents of our protagonists in the Mortal Instruments series. And I felt like it really showed how a group of well-meaning people could go to do really terrible things. So let's talk a little bit more about Simon, because Simon as a main character is everything I never knew that I always wanted. He is such an incredibly lovable and relatable character, and as an outsider to the Shadowhunter world, he has some interesting thoughts about how things are run at the Academy and how, Shadowhunter prejudices need to be changed or eradicated for a better future. In the Mortal Instruments series, Simon wasn't always happy, but he was generally the source of comedic relief and brought good humor to the group of our protagonists. But this new Simon, this boy who doesn't really know who he is, who's just recently lost all of his memories, and is really struggling to figure out who he was, who he is, and what that means for what he's going to do in the future. Seeing this more frustrated, sometimes even angry version of Simon just made me love him even more. I felt like it developed a character that I didn't think was developed well enough in the Mortal Instruments series. I always really enjoyed Simon, but I felt like he kind of got lumped in as the best friend and the fun guy, whereas now we get to see all sides of Simon. He is still that sort of nerdy, comic book loving, video game loving, fun, happy guy, but he does struggle, and that makes him even more real to me. So obviously, we know that a lot of the characters from the Mortal Instruments and the Infernal Devices were mentioned in this book. However, there's also a whole new crop of Shadowhunter Academy students who I'm not really going to talk about much. They were all right. They each had their little shining moments. I don't think that they made the story spectacular. They were all okay. The one who I will address is George Lovelace. And George is Simon's roommate at the Academy. I don't think George was particularly interesting on his own. However, he did play a very important role in Simon's development. Having George as a roommate and eventually as a true friend really helped Simon have this sort of neutral balance in his life of someone who didn't know him before and didn't have any expectations of who they thought Simon should be. George only knew the post-memory loss Simon, and therefore he kind of became this safe place for Simon to go and have a friend who just took him at face value and actually really liked him for who he was in that moment. Having a friendship like that really freed Simon up to get to know who he was now and not put any pressure on himself that he had to bring back his memories. One of my favorite aspects of the book was seeing all of these characters we already knew reintroduced. And I do use the word reintroduced because I feel like that's the best way to describe what happened. In the Mortal Instruments and the Infernal Devices, all of our protagonists are struggling with a major conflict, a war, a villain, a clockwork army, some looming force that is putting pressure on them and creating a conflict situation. But in this story, we get to see them all in a much more casual, laid-back environment. Their characters are supporting the story, unlike some of the other series where there's a lot more conflict and plot that's supporting the story. This character-driven story made it impossible for me to put down the book once I started reading, and actually made me fall in love with all of these characters even more than I had been before. Overall, I really enjoyed the book and the individual stories told within it. I would highly recommend this to anyone who is a fan of the Mortal Instruments or the Infernal Devices and just wants a little bit more from that world. If you want to spend more time with some of your favorite characters, this book is an amazing way to do that. I ended up rating it 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, and even though it's been a couple weeks since I put the book down, I still hold true to that rating. I really enjoyed it, and I did buy a physical copy so that I can continue to read it myself. One last thing I have to say is all the Malik feels are in this novel. If you've read it, you know what I mean. I'm not going to say too much, but I thoroughly enjoyed all of the grown, secure Malik relationshipness. And for that reason alone, I would tell you to read this book. there you have it. That is my review of Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy. I really hope that you enjoyed, and if you did like it, please give it a thumbs up and check out some more of the videos on my channel. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time.